It's kind of fun seeing us jam out. Okay. Welcome to Codex History of Video Games. I'm Mike Coletta.
And I'm Tyler Osby.
And today we're talking about Activision. We're doing part 2 of our history of Activision.
Part 2. I think it's going to be 3 total parts because we'll get to we get to a spot where it's a good ending spot and we go into like more modern Activision. So there's like 3 distinct phases of Activision, I think, for the layperson.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, I'm excited to get started, Tyler. I'm ready. I'm ready for Activision.
So when we last left our Activision heroes, they had successfully broken away from Atari and started their own third-party development house. They were among the first companies to ever do this because back in those days, the maker of the hardware also made the games. That was just how it was. If you made a console, you were the one that made the games for it. Nobody else made games for it. But Activision had just won in court over whether it was okay or not for them to make games for someone else's console, which opened the floodgates for anybody who wanted to make games for Atari to do that. And they did. Boy, did they. Activision's deal with Atari ended up they had to like pay some royalties or something like that. So it wasn't just like, and now anybody can do it. It was like there was an agreement there. So I'm assuming all these other companies maybe set up agreements as well. But so Activision released a ton of games in 1980 and they were super successful. By 1982, there were a ton of other companies also releasing games for the Atari who were emboldened by the runaway success that Activision was seeing. But Activision was actually making good games. And a lot of these other developers and publishers just saw dollar signs and they just put out a ton of garbage. There's a paragraph here that's just ripping straight from Wikipedia because I think it nails it perfectly. The rapid growth of the third-party game industry was easily illustrated by the number of vendors present at the semi-annual Consumer Electronics Show. The number of third-party developers jumped from 3 to 30 between 2 consecutive events, so 10x. At the summer 1982 CES, there were 17 companies, including MCA Incorporated and Fox Video Games, announcing a combined 90 new Atari games. Yeah. By 1983, an estimated 100 companies were attempting to leverage the CES into a foothold in the market. Atari Age documented 158 different vendors that had developed for the Atari VCS. In June 1982, the Atari games on the market numbered just 100. By December, that number grew to over 400. Experts predicted a glut in 1983 with only 10% of games producing 75% of sales. End quote. That's the whole thing. So companies just started taking off here once they realized that other people could make games for the Atari. It didn't have to just be Atari making games for Atari.
They found dollar signs. They just saw dollar signs and they were going for it.
Yep. It's a classic bubble situation. And I think a lot of those development companies were just like, we'll just start up and we'll find programmers. And they didn't necessarily find people who were like game designers, right? They just found people who could technically make a game or make software that ran on an Atari. And so a lot of these games weren't very good. And that sort of like paints the picture here, that paragraph there, I think. There were just too many games and absolutely zero quality control. Most of the games were just like copies of each other or copies of copies. And not like, like how when a genre becomes popular, like Soulsborne games get really popular. And then there's other games that are like a Jedi Fallen Order. It's like kind of a Soulsborne style game, but you wouldn't say it's just a straight ripoff. It's like it's just a similar in style, right? These games were like basically straight up ripoffs, like just like copies of copies of copies, and they just got worse as you went.
It goes back to our whole discussion last week with the history of like Nintendo before video games. That everyone was just doing Pong. We're all making Pong, and that's how it works now.
Yep, and that's what at that times like that's all video games were, was just Pong. So if you were making a video game, you were making Pong, so it was like branching out a little bit here, but a lot of those genres were just like there's just like a lot of Space Invaders clones, a lot of Pac-Man clones, a lot of that kind of stuff. So it's like when you go on Steam and you find like a Unity based like asset flip game where it's just like they just went onto the Unity store and like bought a bunch of assets, made a game that's not really a game but it works, I guess. And like, then they sold it and they made a bunch of money. That's like what was going on here.
You're like, why have I seen this same tree in 15 different indie games in the last year?
Exactly. So there was really no way for the public to like really discern quality at the time. So like nowadays you got the internet. So if you're like into it, if you're into games, you're in the scene, the good games sort of float to the top and they become the topic of discussion. Right. But back then you just kind of went to the store. You looked at a title on the box. Maybe it had screenshots on the back if it were an Activision game. If it weren't an Activision game, it might not even have screenshots on the back. If you were like a real nerd, maybe you read a magazine and you probably had a better idea then. But most folks, there really was no good way to find out which games were good and which were bad. And most of them were bad. They were really, really, really bad. So I don't want this to turn into like history of the crash of 1983, because I think we've kind of covered that in some of our like ultimate history of video games episodes and stuff like that. But it is an important thing that happened to all companies operating in this time. And it's, if you look at it, if you really squint, it's kind of Activision's fault, right? Or at least their actions led to it. I don't know if I would say it's their fault, because they were making good games. They weren't making garbage. But
yeah, I think it's like an unintentional reaction to what was done, because Atari had all good things at heart at the beginning, but
right.
Yeah, they couldn't have foreseen that.
Yeah, and so there was just no quality control, and so like in hindsight, yeah, maybe Atari should have done some sort of quality control there, but we just didn't know this was going to happen, right? So basically, with all those crappy games coming out, consumers just really had no way to know what was good. They only had name recognition to go off of. So there are two games that are sort of pointed to that the crash is not the fault of these two games. Like, oh no, these games came out and then everything died. It's not the fault of those two games only. It's just those two games were like the tipping point, right? And the reason that they were is because of the name recognition. I'm talking about E.T., which is widely regarded as not a great game, although maybe some folks would argue, right?
Some folks like it. That's fine. That's okay. I really don't have an opinion on it because I haven't really even played it, but yeah.
That's okay if you like it. But people just, it was opaque and it was hard to play. And, so maybe if you got good at it, you had fun. I don't know. But also Pac-Man, which was not like a game based on a movie, like a licensed movie thing. It was kind of a port of the extremely popular Pac-Man game in the arcades, right? Like, this is a game that people knew was good because they had already played it in the arcades. And when it came out on Atari, the port was really bad. And there's really no excuse for that because it was bad, I
think we talked about this a little bit in the Ultimate History of Video Games too. They mentioned how this port was not great.
Yeah, the port was not great. The Ms. Pac-Man port that would come out like a little while later, that one was much better. Mm-hmm. But basically, you look at a game like E.T., and by and large, the consensus is this game is not good, just garbage. But this was the point of no return because you couldn't even trust that E.T., something based on like a popular thing, you couldn't trust that was going to be good. You couldn't even trust that Pac-Man, a game you knew already was good, you couldn't even trust that was good.
Do you have experience with E.T.? Have we talked about this yet?
A little bit. I mean, like a passing curiosity. I haven't spent a lot of time with it.
I played it as a child, I feel like, for maybe 5 minutes before I gave up. So I feel like I have nothing to say. So I'm always wondering, like, if you have an opinion, did you play it recently or did you play it a while ago?
I mean, probably 10 or 15 years ago. Whenever I first learned about the crash in the 80s, and I was like, I wonder what that game, how bad was that game,
Yeah, and when everyone heard about the story with the desert, so everyone wanted to know, like, how bad it really was. Yeah,
which turned out to be true, although not to the extent that that people would have claimed that like every single ET cartridge was buried in the desert. Some of them were though. But yeah, so it's like you can't. Like ET was bad, Pac-Man was bad. You couldn't tell whether something was going to be good or bad, and so all you had to go off of was these like popular names, and not even those games were good. So at this point, it's like, why even try? I don't want to buy games anymore. They're all bad. Even the ones I think are going to be good or the ones I should know are good are not. I can't. It's the good times are over, right? Games are done. And that was kind of the first time we'd see a video game fad get really big and then immediately kind of die off. And it was video games as a whole, which we'll see sort of repeat throughout history. That sort of thing repeats itself, but not to the extent that like the entire industry falls, more like just like specific genres, which Activision does have a hand in, at least some of those, running some of those games into the ground. But we'll get to that at a later episode. I think we won't get to that today.
Juicy gossip is what it sounds like.
Yeah. This was a bad time to be in the biz, and Activision was kind of just getting started, which was a real bummer for them. The other thing was, so Activision was actually making good games. There are, quality games, I'm sure, on a game-to-game basis. We can debate if it's good or not. But like, by and large, they were making decent games, especially compared to the garbage that was out there. And they sold their games for $40, which is $127 in 2023 dollars. So these were expensive games. But during this crash, the front of every store had like a bin of just like $5 games, right? So why would you buy one $40 game for your kids when you could just get 8 for the same price, right? Mm-hmm. Even if the games aren't as good, it's kind of hard to beat quantity, So the Activision games, which were actually good, didn't really sell very well because they just couldn't compete on price. And PC gaming was also starting to take off a bit here, so the extra competition there was pretty tough. And Atari was getting into that space as well. So at this point, where in like 1982, 1983, the original Gang of Four is starting to break up. Larry Kaplan,
no.
Larry Kaplan went back to Atari. He got a vice president position, the old boomerang, which I've seen in my life before. Alan Miller and Bob Whitehead went off to form Accolade, which would go on to do some stuff. I don't know if they're still around, actually. I don't think so.
I can do some Googling while you keep going here.
Do a quick Google. Worth a Google. David Crane stuck around to keep making games a little while longer at Activision, but this was kind of the end of early era Activision. And at this point in time, the Atari VCS, also known as the 2600, was kind of an old and decrepit system. Atari had released a successor, the 5200, but it really wasn't taking off in the way the original system had back in the day because it wasn't backward compatible. And its competition, the ColecoVision and the Intellivision, those were compatible with VCS cartridges with an adapter. So it's like, even if you buy a new Atari, you can't play old Atari games. I don't even have to buy an Atari. I can play old Atari games.
Yeah. By the way, Accolade, no longer a company. They were purchased in 1999 and then kind of made into a smaller subsidiary with something else by the company Infogrames. Grames? Okay. It's French. Infogram. Yeah.
No, Infogram.
I'm not gonna try to pronounce again. You know how I do with pronunciation on this podcast with other names.
Yeah. So the 5200 is kind of fizzled out. But the nice thing about being a third-party developer, though, is that you are not bound to making games for any one system. So while Atari was faltering, Activision could just make games for other systems or even for PCs. And that's what they did. They focused on PC games during this time, which was probably a good call because while game consoles were still recovering from the crash, home computers were actually doing fine, especially in places like the UK. I don't know why I like pointed in a direction like that's where the UK is.
That's the way the UK is.
Yeah. But especially like in the UK and in Europe, like computers were a little bit more popular. So that, they were doing okay. So, I think you can also like the reason that they were doing a little better is because you can easily justify getting a computer for something like work or organization or like boring computer stuff, spreadsheets, whatever. Like there's like a legitimate non-game reason to get a computer, but playing games is kind of a bonus. So that adds to the value rather than being like the whole thing's reason for existing, right? So parents or homes would like get a computer and then the kids would be able to play games on it, even though that wasn't the primary purpose of the computer.
That's how I got into Space Cadet Pinball right there. You just described it. It's because of Microsoft Word. Thank you, Microsoft Word.
We've all played a lot of Space Cadet Pinball.
That's right. That's the move right there.
Yeah. So now we're getting to the part where Activision makes kind of its first big acquisition, and that's Infocom. They had been around through the game crash like Activision, but they had pivoted to making productivity software after games became less profitable. It didn't really work out for them, but the folks at Activision knew that there was talent there that could be put to use making games. And Infocom is best known for probably the massively popular Zork text-based adventure game.
That's something I've been meaning to cover on this podcast for so long. Just text adventures in general. It's one of the big topics we haven't gotten to yet, and it drives me crazy.
Yeah,
we haven't done it yet.
Zork is like kind of the gold standard. Yeah,
I just feel like we need an expert. We need someone who's like played these games at the time they came out, which is not me. That was before Tyler and I's time.
So far before our time.
Yeah.
So yeah, but that game was massively popular, so they knew that they had like the chops to make good games, right? And they made some other games, also the BattleTech game, which was set in the BattleTech universe, which is kind of a fictional universe, sort of like Warhammer or Forgotten Realms or something like that. Like there's like lots of stuff that are set in that universe. That universe is also known for the MechWarrior series, which is a series of games that's near and dear to my heart, at least the second one, because the second MechWarrior game came with my first Windows PC that we ever got.
Oh, that's a good memory.
So I played a lot of it, and we had like this super cool enhanced version of it because of the like whatever graphics card that PC had. Like there was a special enhanced version of MechWarrior for it, so it had like textures, which was like, oh my gosh,
look at the textures.
Yeah, whenever I see gameplay of MechWarrior 2 and it's like the actual like version that most people got, I'm like, this game doesn't look very good. But when I checked it out, the ATI Rage version, I was like, dang, this game looks pretty cool.
This was, I think, PAX 2015 is when they had the old MechWarrior there with the full controls, like the mech cockpit, and they had like 16 of them set up so you could play in these big games with people. and it was so fun. Like
That's so cool.
I kind of got in trouble because I was like going through the menus. They were like very like apparently it sounded like if you pick the wrong thing, the whole game is gonna bork. Essentially, it's just gonna break. And they were like, you have to pick these very specific mechs and follow our instructions. And I was like looking through the lists and stuff, and they're like, don't do that. I got like kind of yelled.
You were playing like the actual original game.
Yeah, so there was like all this like technical things and settings and how you had to set stuff up. And I don't even know if I even like actually blew up another mech the entire time I played, but it was like so fun just like trying to pilot it with the controls.
Those games are hard.
They're so hard. It was so hard. I got like murdered by multiple friends, and they were like, got you. And I'm like, oh, this would have been so fun if I'd had like another hour and a half to like figure out what was going on. But we played it for like, they gave us a good like 30 minutes on it, which is pretty good for like a expo, you know, when you're there. And there wasn't really a line because it was kind of like at that point vintage, you know, hardware. But even though I'm like, it's Xbox was what the age of it was as far as the Mech Warrior game we were playing. It wasn't even that old.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it wasn't the first Mech Warrior then, actually.
Oh, it wasn't like DOS Mech Warrior.
No, I don't even know what Mech Warrior it was, honestly, but it was definitely for original Xbox.
And was it Steel Battalion?
Maybe
that was the one that had like the big controller and stuff.
Yeah, I think it was that then. It must have been that because they had like a bunch of them like hooked up all together. And then we were just
that makes sense then. Okay, so you're playing Steel Battalion.
But it was really fun. And I was like looking up like how much do these cost? But then I felt like I was getting dangerously close to being a flight sim guy, which I can't do. It's nothing against flight sim guys. It's just that's a whole new thing. It's like being a train guy, you know.
Yeah, there's a lot. It takes a lot of room to be
go
a
up.
Guy.
Yeah, you get up that list, and then you start. Before you know it, you're recognizing locomotives by their engine sounds, and you can't do that anymore.
Yeah,
you got to move on. You got to move on with your life.
I know people who are like racing sim people too. You know, that just have like the whole setup.
And that's so cool. But I'm also like, there's just too many things. There's too many games to play.
Yeah, racing sim, also boating, like hydroplanes, that kind of stuff.
My brother plays like farm games and ranch sims, and he likes that, and that's a whole new thing that you can go down. I feel like the sim world is a very different video game world than the games that I feel like most people that listen to this podcast are like playing. Like
I booted up Farming Simulator because it's on Game Pass recently. My grandpa was a farmer, and I was like, all right, time to go step into Grandpa Clint's shoes. And I couldn't figure it out, and I got bored of it quickly. But my cousins really liked it, I guess.
Did you what were you trying to farm? What crop were you going for there?
I think I got into the tutorial and I realized that like I couldn't just drive the machinery, the combine. I had to like turn it on and like extend the arm and like and I was like, oh, I don't know if I can handle this right now. And I haven't gone back to it.
You just wanted Grand Theft Auto with a combine, is what you were looking for.
I get what I was looking for.
You just wanted to see potato number go up. Do you even harvest potatoes with the combine? I don't even know how this works. we don't even know.
It would be wheat is what I would want to harvest.
Probably wheat. I think wheat's a combine thing.
Yeah. That's what my grandpa did.
Sorry for the long tangent, but that's this podcast. So welcome to it, everybody.
Anyway, Infocom didn't invent BattleTech like the universe, but they did make a very popular game set in that universe. So they weren't bad developers. That's the whole point of that. Like they made good games, right? But by 1989, Activision had shut them down, which is kind of a pattern that big publishing companies like EA and Activision will go through. So they'll buy a company that's doing very well or isn't doing very well, but made good games. And then they'll sort of like mismanage them or something happens and like they stop making good games and then they just sort of shut them down and everybody's sad about it. This was kind of the first time that happened to Activision.
No, I think we're going to see a pattern here.
Yeah. So, and then Jim Levy, who was the CEO from the beginning, he was like really excited for this acquisition. He really wanted it to work out. David Crane says in one of the articles I was looking at that he was just like a little bit too optimistic through the crash. And he was eventually replaced by a person named Bruce Davis at the behest of the board, which I wrote in capital letters.
The infamous board of companies. This is just like Secession.
Yeah, exactly. And so Bruce Davis was brought in to turn this ship around, I guess. And he was described by Crane as having no creative or marketing skills. And that, and at that point, the last surviving member of the Gang of Four, David Crane, he was like, I got to get out of here. This is not the same place it was when we started it. And we brought in this new CEO who doesn't get it. I got to go. It's time. This is probably one of the moments where it went wrong for Activision, so to speak, because like the start of this saga is like, they're the rebels rebelling against Atari, making great games and like crediting their developers and like generally being a force for good in the video games industry. Bruce Davis coming in is kind of a turning point. And so once he comes in and the last of the Gang of Four leaves, we see Activision kind of turn into something that it wasn't. In fact, they changed their name at this point.
Ooh, really?
Activision did. Yeah. Well, they kind of did. I think they did more of a like a Google, you know how Google is actually Alphabet and then Google is like one of the brands underneath Alphabet.
Oh,
They
yeah.
kind of did that. So they changed their name to Mediagenic. So we've entered the Mediagenic era of Activision history. It's 1988, and Mediagenic has expanded beyond games and into other kinds of software. So the company was divided into 4 parts. It was divided into Activision. That's the part that was a video game publisher for various platforms, the Nintendo Master System, not the Nintendo Master System, but the regular Nintendo, the Sega Master System, the Atari 7800, Atari ST, Commodore 64, all of those games. It was also Infocom, and they made interactive fiction games. And then GameStar, which was an independent company that was bought by Activision in 1986. They made sports games. And then another company called 10.0, which made business software. So I guess this is one of those places where it's like, we make software. Some of it's games, some of it's not games, but that's what we do is make software. We don't focus on something. But these like sort of subsidiaries or sub companies or divisions, I don't know what the proper business term is for it, but like they were all under the Mediagenic banner.
So Mediagenic's the big one.
Yeah.
And then Activision is now a smaller part. But
yeah,
it was
Mediagenic
Activision.
is the Alphabet or the Meta to Activision's Google or Facebook, right?
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So Infocom closed in 1989, and then Mediagenic was just like never really able to get anything done. They didn't turn any profits. They were constantly having to lay people off. Bruce Davis was going to run this company into the ground, just like he had ran Imagic into the ground, which is another company that he like was CEO of, and then it tanked, and so he jumps on to be CEO somewhere else. Is that kind of wild how like CEOs get jobs, totally fail at running a company, just like blast it straight into the ground and then just bounce and do it again somewhere else? Like, who is giving these people second chances, right?
And
if you've already ran a company into the ground, you should not be like, nobody should be handing you the keys to another company.
And they get paid so much money. They get paid so
gosh.
much money to do this. That's what drives me crazy.
Yeah.
So I'm like, you're making millions and millions of dollars, and you have a track record for running things into the ground. But that's the way the business works, I guess, is how it's capitalism. I don't know. I really don't know.
And the way they do this too, I don't know specifically about Bruce Davis, but like a lot of times these CEOs will have like things written into their contracts that like, if you fire me because you don't like what I'm doing, you have to pay me $100 million. And then or some like extreme amount of money. So that's why that a lot of times bad CEOs get to stick around, is because it will cost so much to get rid of them that they just get to stick around. And B, if you do get fired, you don't care. You're gonna be rich either way.
Yeah, like have no personal. I feel bad for the original 4 that you've called them. Like that's gotta see, you saw your dream turn into something else, and I feel like it's happened in so many other businesses for so many things where people start something with like good intentions, and then it just becomes the monster they were trying to avoid in a way.
Yeah, just sort of gets away from you, and then you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become a villain.
It's true.
And Activision lived long enough to become a villain.
That's right. They are not Batman. I'll tell you that much.
No. And one notable thing that happened during this time is they sort of missed out on Myst. So they had a deal with Cyan Worlds, the company that developed Myst, to distribute their games, and then they lost it because they just they were just bad at being a company, I guess. And then a few years later, Cyan Worlds would release Myst, and that's a real bummer for Activision. So whatever.
That is a huge bummer for Activision.
Yeah. So dang. Anyway, Activision's kind of in the tanks here. They're in the dumps. They're having a bad time, and they're probably likely to go out of business soon, except for one man. Here he is.
It's the person I'm thinking it is, isn't it?
It totally is. Bobby Kotick. So as we're going to find out with Bobby Kotick, we all hate him. Dude is awful, right? It's in terms of like just like being bad for the industry, doing money grubbing capitalism stuff, right? But the man can turn a company around. At least he can turn Activision around. So he gained an interest in the video game industry during the crash, and he wanted to restore Activision to its former glory. So Mediagenic was in huge trouble at this point in time. And even the Activision name wasn't enough to save the company from the clutches of Bobby Kotick. And in fact, the Activision name is what attracted Bobby to begin with. So, yeah, he's like a villain now, but like at the time, he was just like a regular rich dude who just wanted to get into the video game industry, right? So to his credit, he knew the value of Activision, and he knew that since Mediagenic was in trouble, that he could buy them at a dirt cheap price. Basically, he saw dollar signs in the video game industry in the early 90s, and rather than start his own company and build it from scratch, he figured he could buy Mediagenic for the Activision name and get a real boost to his rep just from the name. So in 1991, he and a few other investors bought Activision for the low price of $500,000 US dollars.
That is so. How much are they worth currently? Have we looked this up?
Man, I mean, you could look up their.
I'm gonna look it up.
Cap. What's their market cap on the stock?
I'm gonna look it up right now. Okay, you keep going. I'll look it up right now.
So Bobby Kotick became CEO immediately, and he laid off almost every single person who worked there. I think it was like single digits number of people who are still there after Bobby shows up and just slashes everything. So he decided to rebuild and restructure the company from scratch. But this strategy did have some upsides. He retained access to all of the Infocom library, which, as we all know, the games were pretty good, even if they hadn't sold well or something Infocom didn't do well by the end. They had some pretty good games in their library, the Zorks and the BattleTechs and that kind of stuff. And they also had a distribution network, Mediagenic / Activision. They had formed relationships with retail stores and things like that this new Activision could obviously take advantage of. And a distribution network is like really, really important when it comes to being in the retail space. So maybe more important than the Activision name was that retail distribution network. So as much as we hate Kotick today, like I said, you can't deny his skill as a CEO if you define skill as a CEO of like making lots of money, right? Or turning a company around, which is like making lots of money is impressive in its own. But I think being able to turn a company around is like an especially impressive CEO skill to me. Because like we could all say Tim Cook is the greatest CEO of all time because he's probably made the most money out of any CEO for a company or for stockholders, right? But he never had to turn that company around, right? Everything was great when he took over, and he just continued making it great, and that's awesome, and that takes skill too. But he didn't do the Steve Jobs like getting a hold of this company when it was on the brink of being dead and like turning it around, right? And that's what Bobby Kotick did. He did it at the huge price of like laying off a ton of staff and like just getting rid of a ton of stuff. But like his skill at being the CEO and keeping a company alive, you kind of can't really deny it, right?
Yeah, I found the market cap, by the way. Are you ready for it?
Yeah.
So they bought it for $500,000. Right?
Mm-hmm.
72.244 billion is the market cap. That's a pretty good investment, I would say.
Pretty good turnaround. That's pretty good.
Did they announce like how much Microsoft is trying to buy them for? Did that get disclosed?
I'm sure it is.
Is that like, I don't know how these business deals work. Is that like public knowledge when that comes out?
How much is Microsoft paying for Activision? 68.7 billion.
So they're paying 68.7 billion, but their market cap is 72. But it's not going to be exact. It's always going to be a deal.
Yeah, right? You get kind of a discount if you're buying the whole company, you know.
And they're also trying to like kind of rescue them from certain things. Like, for example, the way they treat their employees is a primary reason I think most of us are upset with Activision.
And probably we should look at you could look at the history of the Activision market cap too, because it probably shot up after like Microsoft was.
Oh yeah, because they're like, look at this, look at how good this is gonna go.
And they're like, and Microsoft is like, here's how much we think this company is worth. So people will like, so it makes sense that the market cap would rise.
Yeah,
I'm not a stock expert, but
so we all can. Is it Kotick or Kotick? I have no idea how to say his last name. Is it Kotick? Okay, well we can all hate on Bobby Kotick, but I guess he does know when to buy, I guess he got that business part down.
Yep. He did the business, and you can't really deny his skill there, even if as gamers, we wish he would make different decisions. And so anyway, he met all his goals through the 90s of like, he's like telling investors basically like, hey, we're going to break even by this time. We're going to make profit by this time. So he met all of those goals. And then by 1997, he was like, we will be profitable by buying up lots of like by having great games. Basically, we're going to be profitable, or having not great games, by having games that people want to buy or that will pay money for, which are closely correlated, but not exactly the same thing, right?
I can see people just flaming in the comments. Their games aren't great.
Yeah, Call of Duty's bad. Well, okay, but
Call of Duty's been the same for the last 10 years. In which case, I would kind of agree with you in that sense.
Yeah, but people keep buying it. So.
People like it. People like what people like.
Yeah. So that's kind of where I want to leave this one today. because at this point, we're going to sort of transition into the next phase of Activision's life, which is just massive, massive growth. It's still the mid 90s. We've got a ways to go before becoming the behemoth we know as Activision today. Kotick has turned the company around from the brink of bankruptcy. But it's tough to say that this Activision is the same Activision that started as an Atari rebellion in 1979. It's really just a totally different company that just shares the name of that company. Like, that's one of the big reasons Bobby Kotick bought Mediagenic, was just so that he could have the Activision name, because that was associated with quality back in the day. And, to a certain extent, maybe today as well. When you see a game is being published by Activision, it means something. I don't know if you get excited or not, but it means something to people. So I think it's that this new Activision is kind of interesting in its own right, because it goes on to become one of the largest, maybe, I think it might be the largest publisher in gaming today. Like, maybe between it and EA, kind of. Maybe
yeah, I think it's between those two. I don't know. I think about the childhood games I had that, like, because the first Tony Hawk's Pro Skater was Activision.
Yeah,
right? Not just the first. They all are. I mean, but yeah,
Tony Hawk
and
Call of Duty. What else? Spyro, Crash.
Yeah. And as a kid, I just thought, oh, this is a great game. I didn't really think about Activision in that sense. So it's funny as an adult now that that's like a whole big deal.
Yeah. So I think in part 3, which I think will be the last part of this, we'll cover the rise of Activision through the late 90s into the 2000s as they explode. Oh, Guitar Hero.
Oh, man.
We're going to talk about the fads, right? The motion controls, the plastic instruments. Take a look at some of the game series that they just drove straight into the ground. I'm excited for it because, like EA, this is a company that makes tons of games that we all play and enjoy today. But they also make a lot of decisions that feel bad for the industry. And so it's hard to say whether they're like a net positive. Like, these are companies that have like put in like overly predatory monetary or monetization systems in their games, but also they've made Tony Hawk Pro Skater. So kind of hard,
It's hard to pick. It's really hard to pick.
And even the latest Tony Hawk, the 1 and 2 remake, it's pretty good, man. I don't know if you played it. It's really
I played it. I played through all of it and I beat it because I loved it. Because it's my childhood.
Yep.
That's all I wanted to play.
So so that's the second part of Activision's life, is after the Gang of Four leave, and it sort of flounders for a bit, and then Bobby Kotick buys them, and now we'll go into the Kotick era, as I'm calling it now.
The Kotick era of the Activision time. Well, that was great. I mean, I feel like I'm learning so much. I didn't know about Mediagenic at all. I had no clue.
Yeah, it was a brief flash in the pan time, but they weren't Activision at that point. So what have you been playing, Mike?
Ooh, okay. So I finally beat Baldur's Gate. I did what I said I would do last week. I beat it on Sunday night, and I beat the boss, and it was a struggle, and almost everyone was dead, but I beat the boss.
Good.
And then I went back and I got my good ending, so I wasn't getting friend zoned by Shadowheart, because that was a bummer when I got friends. Because I did it twice. I ended the game by doing a certain decision you can make at the very end that kind of skips the boss fight. Okay. I did that. And then I got an ending and I realized, oh no, I'm not romancing the person I romanced because I didn't complete their quest. So then I went back a couple saves and went and did their whole quest thing. And then I went and beat the boss again. And I gotta say, it was really fun. Like I really enjoyed that game. I'm gonna play it again. I loved it, but I definitely just want to take a break, because if I just burn myself out on it, it's not gonna go well for me. Yeah. So I am now playing Starfield, giving that a go. And I'm having fun and I'm playing it, but I definitely get the feeling that other people have, where it's good, but it's not like the hype that it's not like, because we all had Skyrim. That's like Skyrim.
It feels like Skyrim in space, which is great. Skyrim in space is fun, but it's not like some transcendent next level.
Yeah. And currently I'm not getting bored by like going back and forth. I am curious about the story. Like, what is this artifact? Like, what are we doing? Like, this is kind of interesting me, but I can see myself beating the main story campaign, which according to How Long to Beat is 18 hours, and then stop playing the game. I could see myself doing that. Like, it's just, I know there's so much to explore and see, but I'm just not that into it yet. That could change. I'm only like 5 hours in maybe. So what about you? What have you been playing?
Well, I've been playing a little bit of Starfield as well. I'm doing the main quests sometimes, but then as other stuff pops up that I'm interested in, this is sort of how I do a lot of Bethesda games, especially like the Skyrims and stuff. I'll just go off and do something if it sounds interesting. If it doesn't, I'll just let it sit in the quest log and I'll kind of keep moving forward. I'm having fun with that. I kind of wish leveling was a little bit faster, because I see these skill trees and all these stuff that I want to unlock, and it really feels like it's taking a long time. which is a little bit of a bummer, but maybe that'll make it feel like, I don't know, a sense of pride and accomplishment when I get there. I don't know. But I've been having fun, like kind of flying the ship around and trying to stop spacers and helping people do stuff in some of the side quests and then coming back to the main quest. And I'm trying not to like overly gamify what I'm doing, right? Like I'm just doing whatever feels nice, whatever feels right. I don't feel like I need to stick to it and like keep coming back because I paid for it because it's on Game Pass and it will always be on Game Pass, I assume. So
That's true. I am glad I did not pay money for it.
yeah.
I'm glad I didn't drop $70 on this because I think I would be disappointed if I spent $70 on it. But
Yeah.
because it's on Game Pass, I have a whole different outlook to that.
Yep. That's what I love about Game Pass. It does create sometimes a sort of like, when you download like for emulators, if you get like every single game ever and you just feel like you have infinite choice and then you just make no choices. Not that I've ever done that. Of course, I only play legally purchased.
Only play legally purchased video
So
games.
this is something I assume happens.
You own a copy and then you get a ROM for it, or you make your own ROM.
Make your own ROMs is really the way to go.
As we've said for years.
Right. So anyway, yeah, Game Pass gives you sort of that like too much choice where you feel like you don't have to stick with anything. But it's video games. We're just trying to have fun. So who cares?
Yeah. No, I did actually realize I did get a distress beacon on a planet I was doing the main story for, and I diverted to that. That's where I'm at right now.
I like
so
the
I am like cutting off and doing a different thing and saving people from spacers, and I using the boost pack because I made sure to unlock the boost pack because I heard it's like if you don't unlock it, you're just gonna have to wait to level up to get it. And I'm like, I'm just gonna do it now. So I have it, and that was great.
Yeah, the boost pack is definitely something you want. I kind of wish there was like a better way to traverse planets.
Yeah,
like the boost pack is fine, especially on some of the lower gravity planets. But like walking is really slow.
Yeah, I want a map like everyone has asked for. I want maps. I am so tired of going to cities and getting lost and having to go to a wiki to find something. I think that's really frustrating. That's just weird choice to not include that.
It's 2023 and games should have maps in them. And also you can even like make a universe thing for it where like in Skyrim, you could say like, well, what, you're going to draw your own map? Okay, fine. But we're in space. Like we all have computer. Like, I don't know, give me a map.
Two things about space. No one can hear you scream and they have maps. Clearly.
Yep. Everything is mapped.
Done.
So I've been playing a little bit of Starfield. I did finish. I'm kind of back on my Call of Duty grind, like just trying to play through all of them, which I was doing a few years ago and made it up to about World at War. And so I played through World at War. I finished that a couple weeks ago. I finished the first Black Ops last weekend. And so now I'm like a little ways into Black Ops 2. So I'm kind of doing that when I don't really have anything else, or I just kind of want something that I don't really have to pay that much attention to, And what else? Oh, I've been playing a little bit of Baldur's Gate. I've been playing it with my partner. We started up last night and we're having fun with it. I do think so. If you're going to take a break from playing Baldur's Gate, I think you should probably just wait for the inevitable like definitive edition that comes out like in a year, probably. Because I'd like to give it away to everybody who owns the original, because I'm pretty sure that's what they did with Divinity. It's like kind of Larian's deal is to like not to make people not feel like they got the short end of the stick there. So maybe wait for like some sort of definitive edition where they fix all of the little things that people keep talking about.
Yeah, I got the early access to it, so I spent like $40. Was it 60? I don't even remember how much it was. So I am like ahead because I heard they sold it for more.
Yeah, I think it's $60 now.
So I got a little bit of a deal on it, which was cool. But now I am going to just take a break, take a breather. And especially when mods come out, come out, I'm going to come back into it because they're going to add all the races in D&D and all the rule sets I love. And I'm going to make my characters from D&D campaigns and put them into Baldur's Gate 3. And I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, that'll be
looking at you, Ziggy Beast Buckle. Okay. So now I have an email to read. Do you want me to read this email? You ready for it? We're just going to do one today. This is from Matt, not from Japan. It's a different Matt. Am I cut out for Zelda games is the subject line. Hi, Mike and Tyler, longtime listener, first time writer. I am not a hardcore gamer by any means, but love listening to your podcast and playing retro and new games when I can. Growing up in the 90s, I was in the PlayStation/sports games camp. But several years ago, I bought an N64 to recapture some lost nostalgia. You know me, I highly support this decision for everyone to play N64 games.
Mm-hmm.
I had always heard amazing things about Ocarina of Time, so I decided to give it a try. I played using an online guide, cheap way, I know, but as a 30-year-old with a career, I have only so many free hours.
Okay.
off and on for about 2 years and finally finished it this week. I completely understand the obsession. It's an absolute masterpiece between story and memorable moments, but I found myself thinking it was the longest game ever and pushing through certain parts of it as a chore more than an endless love. Partially the way the game saves or lack thereof, dying in the dumbest ways, darn those age joysticks, or having to pause a dungeon to go forage for arrows, etc. So
Mm.
my question is, am I alone in feeling this way? Are Zelda games all very long slash extensive? I assume controller camera angle frustration is erased in Breath of the Wild and Tears. Should I play Majora's Mask since it's the direct sequel? I need guidance from Zelda experts. All the best, and thank you for reading my short novel, Matt, not from Japan. You
Uh,
are the Ocarina of Time expert on this podcast, the resident. How do you
True.
feel about
I
this?
have played a lot of Ocarina of Time in my day. So I think as you compare them to other Zelda games, I think Ocarina of Time is among the longest. That's for sure. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom notwithstanding, those are really very different games. Very fun, very great. But they're kind of different because of just the open nature of them. Like you really could just kind of play them forever. Um, but yeah, I think Ocarina of Time is one of the longer ones. Majora's Mask is one of the shorter ones.
It is short. I remember it being a shorter Zelda compared to the other ones.
Yeah, so if you want to move on to that one, you totally can. It's got some good evolution from Ocarina of Time, and will be familiar to you in terms of how it plays because it's very similar, and it's a lot shorter. Wind Waker's pretty short too. I want to say Twilight Princess is not as long. Ocarina of Time might be the longest. Maybe not longer than Link to the Past, or I think Skyward Sword is pretty long too. But I haven't
Skyward
really
Sword
played that
is
one.
pretty long. As someone who just played that, it's pretty long. I would also recommend like don't sleep on the Game Boy games too.
Oh yeah, those are
Like
kind of
don't
short, and
those
they're
are shorter and they're more reasonable, and that's really your classic Zelda experience. Like sure, you got Ocarina of Time doing that in 3D, but if you want to go back, I would say go back more than go forward if you really want to
yeah.
experience Zelda. Like go Link's Awakening is the one
Or
that I stand
play
by.
the Link's Awakening remake on
Oh yeah,
Switch.
on Switch. That's the one to
That's
play. Yeah,
really
that's
good.
that's really good, and it's also a very reasonable amount of time. Like
Yeah.
you will beat that before. And the best part is, you really don't need a guide for it. Like there might be parts that you need to look up, like I sure did, but it's pretty intuitive, especially with the remake about where you need to go next, because you'll see spots like, oh, okay, I need to go this way instead. Like there's only so many directions you can go. So I would recommend that more than say jumping ahead. But I agree with you. Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, totally different style Zelda game than Ocarina of Time and what you've done so far.
Yeah.
So
A special shout out to Twilight Princess, which feels thematically more
Mhm.
similar to Ocarina of Time and plays like kind of an upgraded version of it. I don't think it's as long as Ocarina of Time.
Yeah, I would actually say, and this is going to be kind of rude because I did just play it, but I would not recommend Skyward Sword. I would recommend Skyward Sword if you were like, I am in a Zelda mode right now and I need another Zelda game to play, and you'd played all those other ones. Then I'd say go to Skyward Sword. But
Yeah.
there's other ones that I think are a lot better. It's a strong word because again, it's Skyward Sword's still good. This is the least good of them. I'm saying,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like when we do tier lists, it's like people are like, "You hate this game?" Like, no, we don't hate it. We're just saying there's
Yeah.
other ones that are better. I would go to like Link's Awakening or Twilight Princess before then.
Yeah. I think Minish Cap is a little bit underrated
Oh
also.
yeah, I played the
Of
Minish
the Game
Cap
Boy
on the
Advance.
and that's on the Switch Game Boy Advance emulator.
Oh, good.
You can play Minish Cap, so that's a good
Cool.
way to do it too. Awesome. All righty. Well, we did it. As always, if you want to send us an email, you can do that at codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com. Also, our website, codexpodcast.net, has every link you could want on there. We have a Discord channel too. And if you join our Discord, you can also see our mailbag section. So you can just write a message in there for mailbags, and we'll just read those on the podcast occasionally as we go. Our Twitters are on there. Also, our X's are on there. Also, our Trello boards are on there.
It makes it sound like our ex partners are on there. Like all of our exes.
All of our X's live on codexpodcast.net. But yeah, that's where you can find us. So we encourage you to go to that website. Also, the terrible version of Pong I made for fun is on there as well. Codex Pong is on there. So you can play that.
Everybody's got to make a Pong.
Everyone's got to make a Pong, myself included. I decided that was important. So with that, Tyler, do you want to say bye to everybody?
Goodbye, everybody.